The transport ship descended through purple skies, its cargo more valuable than any treasure the Velka Empire had ever claimed. Inside a reinforced containment pod sat Jake Morrison, the last human anyone had seen in 4 to 7 years. His wrists were bound with energy restraints, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, watching everything. The Velka guards thought he looked pathetic. 2 arms instead of 4. Soft skin with no protective shell. Just 2 eyes that couldn't even see in multiple spectrums. They laughed among themselves, wondering how such a weak species had ever built starships at all. Jake said nothing. He'd learned that silence made people underestimate you even more. The Grand Zoological Garden sprawled across 12 square miles of the Velka capital city. It housed creatures from 1,000 conquered worlds, each one a trophy of the Empire's dominance. But the central exhibition hall, the crown jewel of the entire complex, had stood empty for months. They'd been preparing it for something special. Commander Drake Venson oversaw the installation personally. The containment sphere was a masterpiece of engineering, a perfectly transparent globe 40 feet in diameter, suspended by anti-gravity fields in the center of a massive chamber. The sphere's walls could withstand plasma fire and molecular disintegration. Nothing was getting in. Nothing was getting out. They sealed Jake inside just after dawn. Holographic displays flickered to life around the sphere, showing images of Earth, human cities, human technology. All of it gone now, destroyed in wars the Velka claimed humans had started. The displays called humanity extinct, dangerous, a cautionary tale about species that reached too far too fast. Jake stood in the center of his prison and turned slowly, studying every angle, every projection node, every energy fluctuation in the containment field. He had time. He'd make them regret giving him time. By mid-morning, the crowds arrived. The Velka came in their thousands, pressing against the viewing barriers, their forearms gesturing excitedly as they stared at the strange creature. Children pointed and made mocking sounds. Adults took holographic images, chattering about how disappointing humans looked in person. Jake heard every word through the translation field. Weak. Fragile. Primitive. Useless. He memorized their patterns of speech, their body language, the way their secondary arms moved when they felt superior. Information was survival, and Jake had gotten very good at surviving. The days blurred together into a routine of observation and analysis. Scientists came with scanning equipment, documenting his biology like he was a specimen in a jar. They measured his heart rate, his brain activity, his bone density. They shook their heads and made notes about human frailty. One scientist actually said humans must have gotten lucky to ever leave their home planet at all. Jake let them believe it. While they scanned him, he scanned them back. He noticed the security rotations changed every 8 hours. He saw that the containment field flickered microscopically every time a large crowd gathered near it, too many bodies interfering with the harmonics. He observed that the Velka guards grew bored by the 3rd day, checking their communication devices instead of watching him closely. But something else was happening, something Jake couldn't explain. Sometimes late at night when the crowds were gone and the lights dimmed, he felt something watching him. Not the cameras, not the guards. Something deeper, older, impossibly vast. It felt like a presence pushing at the edges of his mind, curious, searching. He'd dream of scales and fire, of creatures that shouldn't exist, of myths from Earth that had followed humanity across the stars. He'd wake up gasping, sure that something was calling to him from beneath the garden's manicured paths and artificial habitats. The guards thought his restlessness was despair. They whispered that the human was breaking down mentally, alone in his cage with no hope of rescue. They couldn't have been more wrong. Jake wasn't breaking. He was waiting. Deep below the exhibition halls, past the public displays and tourist paths, the Velka kept their most sacred treasure locked away. In a vault carved from solid stone, surrounded by ceremonial guards who'd held their posts for generations, something ancient stirred in the darkness. The Draken had been still for 300 years, a living statue, breathing so slowly that some believed it was already dead. The Velka worshipped it from a distance, built their religion around it, but never truly understood it. They saw a symbol. They missed the consciousness beneath the scales. Now that consciousness was waking up. It had felt something impossible, something it hadn't sensed in millennia. A presence that resonated with its own existence, a mind that could touch its own. The Draken's massive eyes opened for the first time since the current Emperor's great-grandfather had been born. In his glass prison far above, Jake Morrison felt a surge of connection so powerful it drove him to his knees. The guards rushed forward, thinking he was having a medical emergency. They didn't see the small smile on his face, or the way his eyes had started to glow with reflected firelight that shouldn't exist. Something was coming. And Jake was ready. The alarm started at 3 in the morning, a shrieking wail that tore through every level of the Grand Zoological Garden. Jake jerked awake in his sphere as emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. Through the transparent walls, he could see Velka guards running in every direction, their forearms frantically working communication devices and weapons systems. Something massive was moving through the lower levels. Jake could feel it now, that presence he'd sensed for days, except it wasn't distant anymore. It was coming closer with every passing second, and it was bringing an avalanche of raw power with it. The floor began to shake. Small tremors at first, then violent quakes that cracked the marble tiles of the exhibition hall. Visitors who'd been sleeping in the garden's luxury hotel came running out in panic, screaming about earthquakes and structural collapse. The guards tried to maintain order, but Jake could see the fear in their movements. This wasn't an earthquake. This was something they recognized, something that terrified them. The eastern wall of the exhibition hall exploded inward in a shower of stone and metal. Through the dust and debris came something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was easily 100 feet long, covered in scales that shimmered like polished obsidian, with eyes that burned like molten gold. A serpentine body that moved with impossible grace despite its size, 4 legs ending in claws that gouged trenches in the floor, and a presence that filled the entire space with crackling energy. The Draken had arrived, and it was magnificent. Chaos erupted throughout the hall. The remaining visitors trampled each other trying to reach the exits. Guards dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, their religious training overriding their military discipline. This was their sacred beast, the source of their civilization's power, the creature their entire culture had been built around worshipping. Seeing it move, seeing it awake, was like watching their god come to life. But the Draken ignored all of them. Its massive head swung around the chamber, those golden eyes searching until they locked directly onto Jake's containment sphere. Then it moved, each step deliberate and purposeful, crossing the hall in seconds. The creature circled Jake's prison slowly, examining him from every angle, and Jake felt that presence from his dreams slam into his mind with full force. Images flooded through his consciousness. Ancient memories that weren't his own. He saw a civilization millions of years old, beings of pure energy who'd created the Drakens as bridges between matter and thought. He saw these creatures seeded across thousands of worlds, waiting in hibernation for species that could truly bond with them. He saw Earth in humanity's distant past, saw humans dreaming of dragons before they'd ever left their atmosphere, saw the genetic memory that connected his species to these magnificent beings. The Draken saw Jake's memories too. Human determination, the wars they'd survived, the way humans refused to quit even when extinction stared them down. It saw Jake's loneliness, his anger at being caged, his desperate need to find purpose again. And the Draken recognized all of it because it had been lonely too, waiting centuries in the dark for someone who could understand. Their eyes met, and something fundamental shifted in the universe. Commander Drake Venson burst into the hall with 50 armed soldiers at his back, heavy weapons charged and ready. But he held up one hand, stopping them from firing. Every Velka child was taught from birth that the sacred beast could never be harmed. It was the first law of their civilization, written in blood and prophecy. To kill the Draken would be to destroy everything the Velka believed about themselves. Drake's voice trembled when he spoke into his communicator, calling for the High Keeper, the supreme religious authority of the entire empire. This was beyond military jurisdiction now. This was a spiritual crisis that could shake their civilization to its foundations. The Draken settled its massive body around Jake's containment sphere like a protective coil, its head resting near the transparent wall. Through the psychic connection they now shared, Jake felt the creature's contentment, its relief at finally finding what it had searched for across the emptiness of space. He reached out slowly, pressing his hand against the inside of the sphere. The Draken moved its head closer until they were separated by only inches of reinforced material. The soldiers watched in stunned silence. Their sacred beast, which hadn't moved in 3 centuries, which their greatest priests could barely sense, was completely focused on the human prisoner. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't destroying. It was protecting. High Keeper Lisa Thorne arrived within the hour, her ceremonial robes flowing behind her as she entered the damaged hall. She was old by Velka standards, her shell darkened with age, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. She'd spent 70 years studying the ancient texts about the Draken, piecing together fragments of prophecy that most of her predecessors had ignored. She looked at the scene before her, the sacred beast coiled around the human's prison, and felt her heart sink. The prophesies had mentioned this. She dismissed them as metaphor, as primitive superstition. But here it was, happening exactly as the old words had described. The beast would wait in darkness until the two-legged ones returned. The ones who walked on two legs and saw with two eyes. The ones who tamed not through force but through understanding. The tamers of beasts would return, and when they did, the Draken would know them. Lisa made the hardest decision of her life. If the sacred beast had chosen this human, then perhaps everything they believed about humans was wrong. Perhaps the propaganda about humanity's extinction was hiding a more dangerous truth. Perhaps humans were exactly what the ancient prophecies had warned about. She gave the order that would change everything. Open the containment sphere. Let the human touch the Draken. If the beast destroyed him, then they'd have their answer. If it didn't, then they'd have to face a possibility that terrified her more than any war. The humans might not be the extinct primitives they'd claimed to defeat. They might be something far more dangerous. The containment field powered down with a soft hum. A single door irised open in the sphere's surface. Jake stood at the threshold, staring at the massive creature waiting just beyond. Every instinct screamed at him to be careful, to move slowly, to survive this moment. Instead, he stepped through without hesitation and reached out to touch scales older than human civilization. The Draken's mind opened fully to his, and Jake Morrison learned what it truly meant to bond with a legend made flesh. Jake's hand made contact with the Draken's scales, and the world exploded into color and sensation he'd never imagined possible. It wasn't just touch. It was everything at once, a complete merging of consciousness that left him gasping and struggling to remember where he ended and the creature began. The Draken's true name flooded into his mind, not words but pure meaning. Kava. Ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond comprehension, and desperately, achingly lonely. For 300 years it had waited in that stone vault, its consciousness stretched across the galaxy searching for something it could barely remember. Searching for a partner, a companion, someone who could truly understand what it meant to exist between worlds. Jake felt Kava's memories wash over him like waves. The creature had been created by beings who transcended physical form millions of years ago, designed as living bridges between thought and reality. Kava remembered dozens of partners across countless lifetimes, beings from species long turned to dust. Each bond had been unique, beautiful, and heartbreaking when it ended. The Drakens lived forever, but their partners did not. Then Kava showed Jake something that made his breath stop. Images of Earth, but not the Earth he knew. Ancient Earth, tens of thousands of years before recorded history. Humans huddled around fires, staring up at stars they couldn't reach, and dreaming. Dreaming of creatures with scales and wings, of bonds between human and beast that defied explanation. Those dreams hadn't been imagination. They'd been memories bleeding through from Kava's consciousness, touching human minds across the void of space, planting seeds of myth and legend that would define human culture for millennia. Humanity's obsession with dragons wasn't coincidence. It was destiny calling across the stars. Jake shared his own memories in return, and felt Kava's wonder at what humanity had become. The creature saw Earth's history through Jake's eyes, saw humans claw their way from caves to cities to spacecraft through nothing but stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Kava saw the wars, the mistakes, the countless times humanity should have destroyed itself but somehow didn't. It saw Jake's personal pain too, the loss of his family when Earth fell, the years of running and hiding, the moment of capture that had brought him here. Through their bond, Kava understood something the Velka never had. Humans weren't weak because they lacked shells or extra limbs. Humans were terrifying because they survived anyway, adapted anyway, kept fighting anyway. Physical weakness had forced humanity to become mentally stronger, more creative, more determined than species who'd never had to struggle. The connection stabilized, settling into something Jake could manage without losing himself completely. He opened his eyes to find Kava's massive head inches from his own, those golden eyes fixed on him with unmistakable affection. Around them, the Velka guards and scientists stood frozen, witnessing something their civilization had never achieved despite centuries of worship. The sacred beast had chosen. And it hadn't chosen one of them. Over the following days, Jake and Kava became inseparable. The Velka were too shocked to intervene, too paralyzed by religious protocol to know how to proceed. High Keeper Lisa watched from observation rooms, recording everything, trying to understand what was happening to the foundations of her world. Kava taught Jake to perceive reality the way Drakens did. Energy fields became visible to him, flowing through everything like rivers of light. He learned to sense the electromagnetic signatures of living beings, to feel the quantum vibrations that connected all matter. The universe Jake had known was a pale shadow of what actually existed, and Kava was showing him the truth beneath the surface. Jake discovered he could feel the emotional states of everyone around him now, reading the Velka guard's fear and confusion as clearly as words. He sensed the scientist's fascination mixed with terror. He felt Lisa's growing dread as she realized the implications of what she was witnessing. But Kava taught him more than perception. The Draken shared combat techniques from civilizations dead for eons, ways of moving and thinking that turned Jake's human limitations into advantages. Humans were small and quick compared to most species. They could slip through spaces larger beings couldn't reach. Their two-armed coordination was actually more efficient for certain tasks than the Velka's four-limbed approach. Kava showed Jake how to use the bond itself as a weapon. The creature could channel energy through their connection, enhancing Jake's strength and speed beyond normal human limits. When they moved together, they became something greater than either could be alone, a perfect fusion of human tactical thinking and Draken raw power. Jake taught Kava about humanity in return, sharing concepts the ancient creature had never encountered. The idea of chosen family, bonds formed not by blood or creation but by mutual decision and loyalty. The human capacity for hope even in hopeless situations. The strange human habit of laughing in the face of death, using humor as a weapon against despair. He told Kava stories from Earth's history, tales of humans befriending wolves and horses and birds of prey, turning wild creatures into partners through patience and respect rather than force. The Velka had tried to worship Kava from a distance, treating the creature like a divine object rather than a thinking being. Humans would have tried to become friends first. Kava understood perfectly, and the bond between them deepened with every passing hour. By the end of the second week, Jake could feel Kava's presence constantly at the edge of his thoughts, a warm consciousness that made the loneliness he'd carried for years finally fade. The Draken felt it too, the healing of a wound 3 centuries old. They completed each other in ways neither had known they needed. But not everyone was happy about their connection. Commander Drake Venson watched the human grow stronger and more confident with each passing day, watched their sacred beast become more loyal to a prisoner than to the empire that had sheltered it for generations. Drake saw the future clearly, and it terrified him. If the human could bond with the Draken, if this was what the ancient prophecies had warned about, then everything the Velka believed about their own superiority was a lie. Worse, if other humans existed and learned what Jake had achieved, they'd come looking for more Drakens. The Empire had discovered 17 other dormant creatures across their territory, each one locked in vaults, each one waiting for partners the Velka couldn't provide. Drake gathered allies in secret, military commanders who shared his fear, who understood that this human represented an existential threat to Velka dominance. They couldn't kill the Draken, but they could kill Jake. Sever the bond before it grew too strong, before the human taught the beast things that would destroy the careful order they'd built. They planned their attack for the darkest hours of night, when even the sacred beast might be vulnerable to surprise. They brought weapons designed to kill without damaging the Draken, neurotoxins and disruptors that would end Jake's life in seconds. They had no idea what Jake and Kava had become together, or how badly they'd miscalculated the cost of attacking a bonded pair. The conspiracy was moving, and Jake felt them coming through Kava's enhanced senses long before they struck. His smile in the darkness was cold and dangerous. Let them come. It was time to show the Velka what humans did when you caged them and then gave them the power to break free. Jake woke 3 seconds before the attack began, Kava's warning blazing through their mental link like a klaxon. The Draken's ancient combat instincts had detected the strike team's approach, reading their elevated heart rates and aggressive pheromones from 3 corridors away. Jake rolled to his feet in the modified habitat they now shared, his enhanced senses painting a clear picture of what was coming. 12 armed Velka soldiers, moving in perfect formation. Commander Drake Venson leading them personally, carrying a weapon that hummed with enough energy to vaporize a small building. They disabled the security cameras and blocked the communication systems. No witnesses, no records, no evidence. Just a dead human and a confused sacred beast that would eventually go back to sleep. They'd planned this carefully, but they'd made one critical mistake. They still thought Jake was the same frightened prisoner they'd caged weeks ago. They had no idea what bonding with Kava had turned him into. Jake felt the Draken's battle consciousness merge fully with his own, and suddenly he wasn't thinking with just a human brain anymore. Kava had fought in wars that predated most species in the galaxy, had defended partners against threats Jake couldn't imagine. That experience flooded through their connection now, tactical data and combat patterns flowing into Jake's mind like he'd trained for decades instead of weeks. The strike team breached the habitat entrance with military precision, weapons raised and ready. They expected to find Jake sleeping, vulnerable, easy to eliminate quickly. Instead, they found him standing in the center of the room with Kava coiled behind him, both sets of eyes glowing with reflected power in the darkness. Drake hesitated for just a moment, thrown off by the sight. That moment cost him everything. Kava moved first, faster than something that size should ever move. The Draken's tail swept across the floor in a wide arc, knocking 6 soldiers off their feet before they could fire a shot. Not killing them, Jake had insisted on that, but hitting hard enough to crack their protective shells and send weapons skittering across the floor. Jake moved simultaneously, his human speed enhanced by the energy Kava channeled through their bond. He covered 20 feet in a heartbeat, ducking under a plasma bolt and driving his shoulder into a soldier's midsection. The Velka went down hard, gasping for air. Jake took the soldier's weapon and crushed it against the wall, useless scrap metal in seconds. Drake opened fire with his heavy weapon, but Kava was already moving. The Draken's scales shimmered with energy, generating a gravitational field that bent the plasma bolt's trajectory harmlessly into the ceiling. Molten debris rained down, forcing Drake's remaining soldiers to scatter for cover. The battle became a brutal dance of human cunning and Draken power working in perfect sync. Jake used his smaller size to stay mobile, sliding between attacks, using the habitat structures as cover and leverage. Every move he made created openings for Kava, and every sweep of the Draken's tail or blast of energy drove enemies into positions where Jake could disarm them. The Velka were trained soldiers, but they were fighting something they'd never encountered before. A bonded pair moved like one organism with 2 bodies, each anticipating the other's actions perfectly. When Jake Dove left, Kava was already striking right. When the Draken created a distraction, Jake was already flanking from an unexpected angle. 3 soldiers tried to rush Jake simultaneously, thinking human fragility would be his weakness. Jake caught the first one's arm, used the momentum to spin and throw the soldier into his companions, then Kava's tail was there to sweep all 3 into an unconscious pile. No killing, but no mercy either. Drake's weapon hummed with building charge, preparing for a shot powerful enough to kill both Jake and potentially harm Kava. The commander's eyes were wild with desperate rage, his careful plan falling apart around him. If he couldn't have a clean assassination, he'd settle for mutual destruction. Jake felt Kava's response before the Draken even moved. The creature's mouth opened, and reality itself seemed to bend around those ancient jaws. What emerged wasn't fire or plasma, it was something far more terrifying. A focused gravitational pulse that hit Drake's weapon and compressed it into a ball of crushed metal the size of a fist. The energy cell detonated harmlessly, contained by the gravitational field until it burned itself out. Drake stumbled backward, staring at his empty hands, finally understanding the depth of his mistake. The sacred beast hadn't been showing its full power because it had never needed to. 300 years of peace had made the Velka forget what their revered creature actually was. Not a symbol or a religious icon. A weapon, designed by a civilization that had conquered galaxies. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. All 12 soldiers were down, injured but alive, their weapons destroyed. Jake stood among the wreckage, breathing hard but unharmed. Kava loomed behind him, scales still glowing with residual power, a clear message to anyone watching. Touch Jake, and face the full fury of something your ancestors were wise enough to never challenge. Alarms were shrieking now, the sound-dampening field Drake had used finally failing. Security forces would arrive in minutes, and they'd find a scene that would shatter every assumption the Velka held about humans and their sacred beast. High Keeper Lisa arrived ahead of the security teams, her personal guards spreading out to secure the area. She looked at the defeated soldiers, at the undamaged human, at the Draken radiating protective fury. Her worst fears were confirming themselves in real time. She'd spent the past week buried in the oldest archives, translating texts that hadn't been read in thousands of years. Prophecies her predecessors had dismissed as mythology. Warnings written by the beings who'd first brought the Draken to Velka space, instructions that had been ignored because the Velka wanted a symbol of their own greatness rather than the truth. Lisa's voice was steady despite her fear. She needed Drake and his conspirators to hear what she'd discovered, needed her entire civilization to understand what they'd done. The archive texts were clear. The Drakens were never meant to be worshipped from a distance. They were meant to be partners, bonded with species that could match their power with worthy consciousness. The ancient beings who created them had seeded the creatures across the galaxy deliberately, waiting for species to evolve that could form these bonds. The Velka had found a Draken and built a religion around it. But they'd never been able to bond with it, never been worthy in the way the ancient texts described. They'd assumed it was because they were special, chosen, blessed. The truth was simpler and more painful. They weren't the right species. They'd never been the right species. The texts described the true partners in clear terms. Two-legged. Two-eyed. Stubborn. Creative. Capable of forming bonds across species barriers through empathy rather than worship. The text called them the tamers of beasts, the bridge walkers, the ones who would awaken the sleeping dragons when the time was right. The text described humans perfectly. Lisa looked at Jake, saw the confidence in his stance, the easy way he touched Kava's scales, the bond between them that blazed bright enough to see with spiritual senses. The Velka had captured what they thought was the last remnant of an extinct species. Instead, they'd revealed to the entire galaxy that humans still existed, and they could do something the mighty Velka Empire never could. They could wake the dragons. Drake tried to speak, to justify his actions, to explain the threat. Lisa silenced him with a gesture. The commander had committed the ultimate blasphemy, attacking the sacred beast's chosen partner. His fate was already sealed by laws older than his bloodline. But Drake's conspiracy revealed a more dangerous truth. If military commanders were willing to risk everything to eliminate one human, it meant they understood the real threat. It wasn't Jake. It was what Jake represented. Proof that humanity could bond with the most powerful beings in known space, and the Velka had just broadcast that fact across every communication network in the galaxy when they announced their prize specimen. Lisa's instruments were already detecting them. Long-range scans showing 3 vessels entering Velka space from the outer territories, moving fast and broadcasting on old human military frequencies. Ships that shouldn't exist. People who should be extinct. Coming for one of their own. The humans were coming, and everything was about to change. The 3 human ships appeared on Velka sensors like ghosts materializing from the void. They weren't military dreadnoughts or war cruisers. They were civilian vessels, retrofitted colony ships and trading freighters that had been running silent in the outer territories for decades. But their weapons were hot and their intentions were crystal clear. They wanted Jake Morrison back, and they weren't asking politely. The Velka High Command assembled in their war room, holographic displays showing the approaching vessels from every angle. Fleet Admiral Stone commanded 200 warships in orbital defense positions. The humans had 3 ships that looked like they'd barely survive atmospheric entry. The math seemed simple, the outcome certain. But High Keeper Lisa watched those 3 ships and felt cold dread settle in her chest. She'd finally finished translating the complete prophecy texts, and what she'd found kept her awake for 2 straight nights. The Velka Empire controlled 17 dormant drakons in secure vaults across their territory. 17 ancient creatures they'd discovered and locked away, unable to wake them, unable to bond with them, but unwilling to let anyone else have access to them either. The prophecy said the tamers of beasts would come, and when they did, the sleeping ones would wake. All of them. Not slowly, not gradually, but like a cascade reaction spreading across the galaxy. One bond would lead to another, then another, until every drakon found its partner. Lisa had watched Jake and Kava together for weeks now. She'd seen what one bonded pair could do. The combat capabilities, the tactical coordination, the sheer power they wielded when working in perfect harmony. One pair had defeated 12 trained soldiers in minutes without breaking a sweat. 17 pairs would be unstoppable. And if humans had survived in hiding for decades, if they'd managed to rebuild enough to send rescue ships, then there were probably a lot more than 17 of them out there. The High Command wanted war. Admiral Stone was already positioning the fleet for a decisive strike, planning to destroy the human ships before they reached weapons range. A quick, clean elimination of the threat. Proof that the Velka Empire didn't negotiate with inferior species, no matter what ancient texts claimed. Lisa made her decision. She opened a direct communication channel to Jake's habitat, bypassing the military chain of command entirely. This was beyond politics or tactics now. This was about survival, and the Velka needed to understand exactly how much danger they were actually in. Jake was already aware of the approaching ships. Through his bond with Kava, he could feel the Draken's growing excitement. Other humans meant other potential bonds, more of Kava's kind finally waking after centuries of lonely darkness. The ancient creature was practically vibrating with anticipation. Lisa's message was simple. She needed Jake to understand what was about to happen, needed him to see the full picture before the shooting started and everything spiraled into a war nobody would win. She transmitted the complete prophecy texts, the location data for all 17 dormant drakons, and the classified military reports about human survivors the Velka had been tracking and hunting for years. The Velka hadn't just captured the last human. They'd been systematically trying to exterminate every human they could find, covering up the survival of the species because admitting humans still existed would mean admitting the prophesies might be real. Jake read everything in seconds, Kava's enhanced processing speed letting him absorb information faster than any normal human could manage. The anger that burned through him was cold and controlled, tempered by weeks of Draken discipline. The Velka hadn't just caged him for display. They'd been hunting his people, killing survivors, trying to wipe out humanity a second time because they were terrified of what the prophesies predicted. But Lisa's transmission included something else, a personal message that made Jake pause. She wasn't trying to justify what her people had done. She was offering a choice. War or alliance. Destruction or cooperation. The Velka had resources, territory, technology, and 17 dormant drakens they couldn't use. Humans had the ability to bond with those creatures, to wake them up and unlock power the galaxy hadn't seen in millions of years. Together, they could build something new. Apart, they'd destroy each other and waste the potential the ancient creators had intended. Jake looked at Kava, feeling the creature's thoughts mixing with his own. The Draken didn't care about politics or empire or prophecy. It cared about ending the loneliness, about finding more of its kind and watching them bond with worthy partners. Kava had waited 300 years in darkness. It didn't want to wait anymore. Jake made his choice. He opened a communication channel to the approaching human ships, his voice broadcasting on frequencies only they would recognize. He told them to hold position, to keep weapons ready but not to fire. Then he opened a second channel to the Velka fleet and delivered the same message. Hold your fire or face something worse than you can imagine. The standoff held for 3 tense minutes, both sides waiting for someone to blink first. Then Jake did something no one expected. He asked High Keeper Lisa to arrange a meeting, neutral ground, representatives from both sides. Not to discuss surrender or victory, but to talk about what came next. Because Jake had realized something the Velka hadn't. This wasn't about one human or one Draken. This was about the future of multiple species, about power that could either unite or destroy them. The ancient beings who created the Drakens had intended them as bridges between species, ways to force cooperation through shared bonds that transcended cultural differences. The meeting happened aboard a Velka diplomatic station, neutral territory monitored by both sides. Jake arrived with Kava, the massive Draken barely fitting through corridors designed for smaller beings. The human representatives came from the rescue ships, Captain Riley Chen, a weather-beaten woman who'd spent 20 years running guerrilla operations against Velka hunters, Thomas Wade, a former Earth Defense Force officer who'd been fighting since the day his planet burned, and Beth Carver, a xenobiologist who dedicated her life to studying any ruins of human civilization she could find. They stared at Jake and Kava with open wonder, seeing proof that the old myths were real, that humans could actually bond with creatures from their deepest legends. Beth actually cried, overwhelmed by the confirmation of theories she'd believed in when everyone told her she was chasing fantasies. Lisa presented her proposal with clinical precision. The Velka Empire would grant full citizenship to all surviving humans, provide resources for rebuilding, and most importantly, grant access to the 17 dormant Drakens. In exchange, humans would share the bonding process, help wake the sleeping creatures, and join a new alliance focused on exploration and protection rather than conquest. Admiral Stone objected immediately, calling it surrender, claiming humans couldn't be trusted. But Jake shut him down with a simple demonstration. He had Kava share a fraction of their bond's power with everyone in the room, letting them feel the depth of connection, the absolute loyalty, the impossible understanding that flowed between bonded pairs. Then Jake explained what the Velka military hadn't grasped yet. If this turned into war, humans would win. Not through superior numbers or better weapons, but because every human who bonded with a Draken would become something the galaxy hadn't seen since the ancient creators walked among the stars. They'd become unstoppable. But Jake didn't want war. He wanted something better. Humanity had spent too long running, hiding, barely surviving. The Velka had spent too long conquering, dominating, missing the point of what their sacred beast represented. Both species were broken in different ways. Maybe together they could fix each other. Riley spoke for the human contingent, her voice rough with decades of grief and anger. She wanted justice for the humans the Velka had killed, wanted accountability for years of genocide. But she also understood survival, understood that sometimes the best revenge was thriving despite everything trying to kill you. The alliance was agreed upon after 6 hours of brutal negotiation. The Grand Zoological Garden would be transformed into the Academy of Bonding, a place where both species could learn together. Jake would train the first generation of human bonders, passing on everything Kava had taught him. The Velka would provide the infrastructure, the resources, and most importantly, access to their dormant Drakens. Within weeks, the first new bonds formed. Jake watched as Riley touched the scales of a Draken that had slept for 400 years, watched the ancient creature open its eyes and recognize its partner at last. He felt Kava's joy through their connection as more of the ancient beings woke up, ending centuries of isolation. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. Not when humans flew alongside creatures of living legend, not when the fragile-looking two-legged species proved that true strength came from bonds freely chosen rather than power taken by force. Jake Morrison had started as the last human in a cage, displayed like a curiosity for an empire's amusement. He ended as the architect of humanity's greatest alliance, the first of a new generation of dragon riders, living proof that even when you're caged and alone and the entire galaxy thinks you're extinct, humans find a way to survive, adapt, and turn their prison into a throne. The story of the last human became the legend of the first bonded, and the galaxy would remember both forever.